Hi, and welcome to today's edition of Storytime. Today's excerpt is from a short story called When Anne Calls, and it's from my collection, Peripheral Visions and Other Stories. I'm sure you've all waited for someone to call you, a loved one, a friend, someone new you just met, and those times of waiting can be very difficult. In this particular story, it's a mother waiting for her adult daughter to call her. A little heartbreaking knowing that she's waiting, and you can't help wondering and hoping that at some point her daughter will call her back. When Anne calls. What about Kate? Kate, Catherine, Katie, Katerina. She tried the names out, savoring the sound of them, imagining herself calling them. Katie, come get your snack. Katerina, it's time for your nap. No, not Kate. The old man folded his newspaper, keeping one finger tucked firmly inside so he could find where he left off reading. It makes me think of Katharine Hepburn, and you know how I feel about her. You don't like her because she was independent, the old woman retorted, but with little heat. It was an old familiar argument, after all. I didn't like her because she didn't know her place, he answered with finality before returning to the obituary column. So rarely did they see any of their old acquaintances that he had come to rely on the newspaper for news of someone's passing. All right, not Kate then. But how about Elizabeth? That's a nice old-fashioned name. But the old man didn't answer. She didn't mind. Many evenings he didn't answer her, partly because with age had come a loss of hearing, partly because after 50 years he had probably heard everything she had to say and given every conceivable response. But still he could show some interest. She remembered what she was doing when Anne had called with the news, frying up some liver and onions for supper, and the smell of the onions had brought tears to her eyes. Anne thought she was crying about the news. Really, Mother, she had said, with the exasperated tone that so often colored her words. I'm only having a child. There's no need to cry about anything. Anyway, ever since Anne had let them know about her baby, she had been unable to think of anything else. Baby names, baby clothes, the smell of baby powder and the feel of baby skin. Sarah delved deep into her own past and brought back those magical moments. From the time she knew she was expecting to the time when Anne was brought to her, wrapped in swaddling clothes like the biblical story of Jesus' birth. She had hoped to see more of Anne, had longed to watch her daughter grow heavy with child. But instead, months passed since the call, and all she could do was imagine the fullness of her daughter's belly, the swelling of her breasts. Sometimes she would place her hand on her own soft, flabby abdomen and try to recall the flutter of a baby's movement, how it seemed her insides were turning upside down as the baby kicked and turned and rolled. So long ago. She was nearly 41 when Anne was born, and now Anne herself was in her late 30s. She had named her daughter after her husband's mother in an attempt to soften the old woman's attitude toward her son's wife. Instead, she had unwittingly imbued her daughter with her grandmother's personality. Cold, severe, distant. Those adjectives could just as easily have been applied to the child as to the elder. From the time she was old enough to express her own individuality, Anne had been stubbornly resistant to affectionate gestures and pet names. My name is Anne, she would insist, when Sarah made the mistake of calling her Annie or Anna, or any one of a dozen endearments like sweetheart. She was more forgiving of her father, perhaps because he so rarely spoke to her, but she resisted any show of affection from her mother, leaving the old woman to hold it all inside. And that is just a little taste of When Anne Calls. As I said, it is from my collection, Peripheral Visions and Other Stories. You know, when you think about what triggers a story writing, I think about the kind of people that I knew growing up. In particular, my parents were first generation born here on both sides. My grandparents were immigrants. And I often wondered what it must have been like, in particular for my mother's mother, who gave birth to all four of her children here in the United States, far from any relatives from her own parents, especially from her own mother. It couldn't have been easy all those years when you can't communicate, not like now. You can pick up a phone, you can send a text, you can send an email, you can FaceTime. You know, back then, letters, if they came at all, were few and far between. And the loneliness must have been very difficult, something you had to accept, something you had to adjust to. And at least there was a reason for it. Her parents were overseas in Slovakia. She was here in the United States. But it must be so much harder for those parents when their child is maybe in the same city, maybe just a few states away, maybe when there is no geographic reason for the distance, only an emotional situation, only a relationship breakdown. That was what I was trying to get across in this particular short story about how the mother felt, about how she was hoping that at some point, maybe before the baby's born, maybe after the baby's born, there could be some kind of a kindling of a relationship between the mother and the daughter, brought about by the birth of the child. I can't help hoping that's how it's going to turn out, but you never really know. All you can do is hope for the best, and that is what the story is about. It is about hope, about hoping that at some point things will come about in a way that at least brings some comfort to the mother as she waits for the moment when Anne will call. Thanks so much for listening to this little excerpt of When Anne Calls. If you're intrigued by it, feel free to pick up a copy of Peripheral Visions and Other Stories and let me know what you think of it. In the meantime, that's all for today's story time, and I look forward to coming back again next week and bringing you yet another story to listen to and hopefully enjoy. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.